All right, we are back with another Fireside Chat, and today we have Sue Wonky with us. And thank you so much for joining us, Sue. This week we are going to be continuing to look at the life of David and what it's like to be a man after God's own heart, and how David inquires of God.
Yes, it's great to have you here, Sue.
Thank you
I just remember so clearly, I don't know how long ago it was probably longer than I think it was.
4 years ago?
That when you came here and you were going to Fireside too, and you had such an amazing testimony because you had an amazing conversion, and then you're a senior executive at Salesforce, and so you've lived out that in your working life. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I work at Salesforce, and thanks for having me. And it's been nice to have a community here as I kind of go through this journey. But so I lead a documentation team at Salesforce, so we write the online help and the developer guides. And then Salesforce really advocates special interests, and so we have all of these things called employee resource groups. And one of them, which I was blessed to help start, is called Faith Force. And so I've spent a lot of time kind of helping people integrate faith in a respectful way at the workplace.
Right. Well, it's great to have you with us.
So where are we in the story?
Finally, Saul is killed, and David begins to come into the place that God anointed him for, and so we see him. And one of the most remarkable things that I've learned in preparing this particular series is that David made an awful lot of mistakes, and in one sense that's a great relief, because he wasn't perfect. We're not trying to compare ourselves to somebody who's perfect, but we're comparing ourselves to somebody, or learning from somebody who was clearly a man after God's own heart, but made mistakes. Even in this particular period when he was a great when he comes into his purpose, he makes mistakes. But that's where we are in the story, and we see this is the sort of the period where, in a sense, Israel comes into its strength. First few years, not so much, but
it's very easy for us to think that coming into God's anointing or His purpose for our lives looks like being a professional Christian. You go on the mission field, you become you start working in a church or something like that. But your story is very different, Sue, and I'm wondering if you would share with us a little bit about the different forks in the road that God has taken you down, and your process of discerning, what do you want me to do at this fork?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I converted back in 2017, and it was this kind of life-changing, of course, event. And I initially kind of started to get involved in church and began looking for support. How do you integrate your church life, your faith with your workplace? Because I was wondering, well, how do I suddenly show up in the workplace as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus? And unfortunately, I didn't find a lot in the kind of church environment. And so what I had to do is just figure it out when I got to work. So I thought, well, okay, I'm not ashamed of this. How do I not be ashamed, and also maybe find other people who are not ashamed but also not sure how they can talk about it at work? So I kind of did some searching. I searched across our networks and for keywords like Christian or faith, and I would find just a few people, and those few people were enough to kind of get together and begin praying, and that grew and grew, and we realized it isn't enough to just pray kind of in secret, right? Like, this is a type of identity that is really no different than your racial identity, various identities in terms of its importance to a person of faith. It is often your number one or number two identifier. And if that's true, and if companies say bring your full authentic self to work, well, then you should be able to bring that self to work too. You shouldn't have to hide it. And I had this sense that I don't think you do have to hide it. I think we just think we have to hide it. And so we talked to some executives, pretty early on, and we said, what would it look like to allow and honor people of faith in the workplace? And they were very receptive to it with some really clear kind of guardrails, which, I can talk about later, but with that started this group called Faith Force, and it became the fastest growing employee resource group in company history, with just thousands of people all across the world joining this and celebrating and giving back to the community. And it's just been this really shocking and wonderful, in a way to experience Jesus in the workplace, is how I see it. That's where I really show up and experience what it's like to be a Christian in the real world.
Very interesting.
So to kind of answer your question, once I really embraced that I was to figure this out in the real world versus getting instruction from church or from ministries, that's when I kind of discovered my purpose, I think, and discovered the path. And it was from just really praying and listening to God versus showing up on Sunday and expecting sort of a playbook. I wasn't getting that. And so it was much more about listening to what God wanted me to do.
So what does it actually look like when you're trying to discern the next steps, what were some of the roadblocks that were in the way that you had to kind of figure out how to navigate, and what did it look like to inquire of God at each of those stages?
Well, I would say one of the biggest ones is, not everybody was excited to hear that there was a Faith Force popping up at work. And I got several emails from totally different perspectives. Definitely some atheists reached out and said, we've worked so hard to get faith out of work. What are you doing? And you're kind of compromising everything. And we've even had panel events we had one called Conversations with Atheists. And we asked them, what is it like to be an atheist? Why are you an atheist? What are some misconceptions that people have about you? And it turns out they often feel judged and kind of pigeonholed. And it's, when you have those kind of conversations of, tell me your story, that's when real healing happens. And then there's even a possibility where they might say, if once you've listened to them, they might say, tell me about your faith. What's your story? But not until they feel heard. And you certainly don't do that manipulatively for that purpose, but that is the fruit that comes of listening to somebody's story. Most people in the Christian community that I encountered were very loving and wonderful and kind of scooped me up and helped me out and everything. But there was also some folks I would put more in sort of the predator camp, where they, in the sense that they're looking for new converts, new kind of vulnerable people to kind of shift in one way or the other. There were multiple of them, folks that would reach out to me and just really want, either to mentor me or to kind of guide me to support their ministry, and would sort of set up meetings with me under the guise of I just want to hear your story, and then would sort of try to get me to fund their ministry or to, pursue different goals that were not what God was asking me to do.
It's interesting because obviously when you are really sort of a visible person that everyone's kind of gathering around, that you're going to get a lot of different voices speaking into your situation or trying to harness your energy towards something. So how have you learned to tune your ear to God's voice, your shepherd's voice, as opposed to all the other stuff that's going on?
I mean, it's very simple for me. It's just morning prayer. I mean, every morning I wake. I don't assume everybody's a morning person, and I'll do different things. Sometimes I'll look at the Bible app. Sometimes I'll read my physical Bible. I will always look at my calendar, and I will always to see what God's telling me about that day, and then I will go through the Lord's Prayer in a lot of detail. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And just immediately, this is all about your name.
Right.
Thy kingdom come. Oh, how are you coming to earth today, now? It makes me think about that. Thy will be done. What is your will today? Not my will. On earth as it is in heaven. This should reflect heaven. And it just puts me in this mindset. And then I think back at yesterday, and I thank God for all the things that He did for me yesterday and for my kids and my family. And then I ask for things, because this is the daily bread. I always think of give us this day my daily bread. I feel like, well, God gives us a lot of things, but what if I could ask for just one thing, one piece of manna today? Yeah. What would that one thing be? And it's in that moment I feel like that I get my direction from God. It's this, it's this. Yeah.
It seems to me that one of the challenges that you then have when you've got these people who want to own you or manipulate you or do all those sorts of things, to then also have to realize that there are the people who God wants you to engage with, to hear from, to speak into and receive from, and it's knowing who those people are and engaging with them and avoiding the ones who want to manipulate you.
I just imagine that there are a lot of people who are listening in who are just like, you hear God? What does that actually feel like? How do you know you're walking in His will?
I would just say for me it feels like a weight off my shoulders more than anything. It's not that I hear God's voice rumbling through my kitchen and I think when we do say like I hear from God, I think that does turn a lot of people off because they're like, well, I don't, so God doesn't love me apparently. So for me it's just a load off. I mean, so I have a son with special needs and it's just been a long journey of finding him the right treatment and diagnoses, and I just remember so many times taking a walk, even before my dog, taking a walk and just praying and realizing like, oh, all I have to do is today. That's it. I just get reminded all I need to do is do the 3 things that God's asked me to do today, call so-and-so, convince so-and-so, and God will do the rest. He's carrying, I love the story of the yoke. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. And I picture this big heavy weight of our life. And, normally it's just you feel like you're carrying the whole weight with this single yoke, and then you realize Jesus is there and He's bigger than you and He's carrying most of the weight. It's actually this double yoke. And you need to walk. You do need to move forward. You can't just let Him drag you. But you don't have to do that much. You just have to do today. And that's a wonderful feeling because I just compare that to before I had faith in my life when I was an agnostic. And you just don't know what the future holds. I mean, there's just this, for me anyway, this weight of uncertainty and insecurity and, well, what if that happens and what if that happens? And now I just think, well, God will handle it, I'll still have to do something, but He's got it.
I think that's very much what my experience has been over the last year is learning to say that. Okay,
it's peace.
Yes, and I think that's what it's the one of the ruling verses of my life is in Colossians 3, where it says, "Let the peace of God rule in your heart." And I found that when I'm faced with a dilemma, or I don't quite know which way to go, I try on ideas in my head. I sort of say, okay, let's just imagine that I do this. And then I think that very often God brings a sense of peace inside. So you've tried it on, you've found the pieces there, but then there are times when you just don't feel peace. I like you, I don't hear audible voices of God. At least I haven't done. I know some people do. I haven't. But I do. But there are times when I do get checks in my spirit. Which I know that sounds very spiritual, but it's something that says, "Oh, pay attention here. There's something not quite right."
In Psalm 23 when I always picture the sheep just sort of like following for the next step, and even when things look very bleak inside the valley and you feel vulnerable, all you have to do is trust that whoever's leading you has been down that path, and they know how to get to the other end and how how much of a relief that is, you know, that you're not doing this on your own. And even if you kind of like miss
Go the
your,
wrong way.
it's okay. There's like, the shepherd is,
The shepherd will look around and say,
come back this way. And,
exactly. There's no shame. Like
Mhm.
even I've made big mistakes, you know, followed the wrong people, and you just pick yourself up, and he's still right there. So it's wonderful to have that.
Yeah, and I mean that's obviously one of the things which is so characteristic of David's life is his willingness to repent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that there are other people who make mistakes. I mean, Saul made a load of mistakes, but Saul was never willing to turn around and say, terribly sorry, I made a mistake. Whereas one of the characteristics of David's life is a life of repentance. And I think that's one of the challenges, that to live as a follower of Jesus, we need to live confessional lifestyle, a repentant lifestyle that says, okay, it may be 3 or 4 times a day I have to turn around and say, I'm sorry, Lord, I didn't mean to do, I shouldn't have done that.
And you see David doing that, like in the cave, you know, when he cuts off Saul's robe. He's so attuned to his own heart and being able to talk to God about it, that he can come out and go, I'm so sorry I did that. I mean, like, who does that? Really, right?
Yeah, really.
and it comes to me mostly in prayer, you know, because
it is.
There's that place where it says, you know, after give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we, and I think, oh yeah, you know, and I wouldn't have thought that. I wouldn't have like given the space to have that thought if I hadn't prayed. I would have just zipped onto my day and checked off my email, you know, and it is it's a good feeling to be humbled.
How, if you look back 4 years ago, and you sort of see how you were responding to all sorts of different things, and there was everybody and their grandmother wanted you to speak to them and speak at this meeting, and where you are now, how would you characterize where God has taken you to from that place?
So it was almost like a startup that just exploded, like tremendous success. And then it sort of just equalized. I mean, it's still going up. I mean, it's still, when new people joining, people love it. It's very secure. But then there was COVID, right? And so much of what I was doing was 2 things. It was big events, you know, because I thought that's the biggest way to have impact. And then it was these very courageous conversations with people that were kind of opposing Faith Force, and then COVID, and now we're all working from home, and just so much of that went away. The big events went away, the kind of contentiousness went away too, because everybody just kind of shrunk down to their houses and were handling their own problems of, you know, whatever their family situation was or their home situation. And that happened for me too. I mean, you know, I just kind of felt like God was saying, like, okay, Faith Force is on its way. Other people are leading it. Like, we don't need you there anymore. You know, simplify, focus on these 3 things. You know, your family, your job, and your faith. And that doesn't need to be big. Everything, you know, I was used for a purpose, for a time, such a time as this. And I'm not needed there anymore. And to push myself there and to force myself to still be there and to still be, you know, part of this big thing would be not God's will and not needed, because they don't need that big, you know.
It's very,
push.
you know, that sort of reflects what we see in the last part of this. Of this part of the life of David, where David says, "Hey, I want to build you a temple. I want to do," and God says, "No,
I don't need that.
I don't need you to build me a temple.
Yeah.
Somebody else can do that." And sometimes that's really difficult to
Let go of. Right?
to engage with and say, you know, okay, so you don't want that now. Okay, what do you want?
Yeah.
Which is what he did say.
Yeah.
And I think the temptation is to, I mean, he could have blasted ahead and built the temple and just said, and everyone would have said, oh, how wonderful David is. But it wouldn't have been what God wanted him to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
so,
more of Saul's tendency, isn't it? He
Yeah.
kind of did that, like where he kind of got ahead of God.
Mhm.
Sometimes he wasn't willing to wait for that instruction. Whereas I think David, that's one of his key characteristics, is that he is willing to pull back when God says, "No."
Yeah, and it opened up opportunities I never would have guessed by pulling back from that and
Right.
obeying God, you know, and implanting myself more in my kind of day-to-day job. I've built like very deep relationships that I didn't have before because I was like on the stage, you know.
yeah,
And so it was I just obey. I'm just like,
Mm.
you got it. Whatever
yeah,
you
and but learning to do that is,
Yeah.
and especially when because if you have a tendency to feel insecure,
want. Yeah.
if the fame and fortune sort of dissipates,
Yeah.
you suddenly feel, okay, so I'm not good enough or
Mhm.
whatever. Whereas it's not necessarily that learning that no, you are absolutely all that God has made you to be and wants you to be, but it may look different today than it did yesterday.
Well, that was very helpful, I think, for everyone listening and for myself, just to, just talking about what it is really like, because I think it feels so mystical to everybody what it's like to try to discern God's will.